My daughter compared me to her mother-in-law and laughed. I set down my fork and ended 20 years of silence. My daughter was still smiling when I canceled everything. Not metaphorically. Literally. She was mid-laugh, fork in hand, candlelight catching her wine glass, telling me about Eileen again. Eileen and her company, Eileen and her travels. Eileen who had built something, who had made something of herself, who was, in the specific and devastating phrasing my own daughter chose at her own dinner table. Everything you're not, Mom. I set my fork down, picked up my water glass, took a sip, then let her pay your bills, I said. Lissa laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine, disbelieving laugh, the kind that says you can't be serious. What bills, Mom? That question. Those two words told me everything I needed to know about 20 years of my life. My name is Anne Calloway. I am 63 years old, and I built one thing in my life that I am genuinely proud of. A financial planning practice that I started at 31 with $12,000 in savings, a secondhand desk, and a business license I framed and hung above the desk because I needed to look at something that proved it was real. By the time I sold a majority stake 22 years later, the firm managed $340 million in assets for 200 clients and employed 11 people, 3 of whom I had personally mentored from junior associate to senior planner. I am not a flashy person. This matters, I think, to understanding everything that comes next. I have never owned a vacation property. I have never leased a luxury car. I drove a 12-year-old Volvo for most of my 50s because it was paid off and it ran, and I had better uses for the money. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb of Chicago with good schools and reasonable property taxes, and I have painted every room myself because I find manual work calming and because paying someone $3,800 to roll beige paint on walls seemed like an argument against everything I'd spent my career trying to teach people about money. I say all this not to establish virtue. I say it because you need to understand what Lissa saw when she looked at me and why Eileen dazzled her so completely. Eileen Voss was my son-in-law Michael's mother. I had known her for 11 years since Lissa and Michael started dating during their last year of college. The college I paid for, though that's a detail I'll come back to. Eileen was the kind of woman who made a room shift when she walked in. She wore her age like a challenge. She had the particular glamour of someone who has built a mythology around herself so consistently and for so long that even she has stopped distinguishing it from reality. She talked about her cosmetics company, Natural Beauty, with the practiced reverence of a founder, the long nights, the early sacrifices, the vision that nobody believed in until it was undeniable. She had a story about mortgaging her apartment to make payroll during the first year that she told with such specific, lived-in detail that I had never questioned it. Lissa loved that story. She loved everything about Eileen, actually, with a devotion that I had spent years telling myself was healthy and normal and nothing to take personally. I should have listened to the part of myself that knew better. The dinner where everything changed was a Saturday in October. Lissa had hosted, her house, her table, her cooking, Michael and their kids, Kyle and Julia, 15 and 12, me, and a conversation about Eileen that had been building for months. It had started earlier that afternoon, actually. I had stopped by to drop off Julia's birthday gift and walked in on Lissa on the phone, laughing that particular laugh she reserved for Eileen, saying, I know, she's incredible. She'd hung up and told me Eileen was thinking about launching a new line, that Eileen had a meeting with investors in New York, that Eileen was possibly the most impressive person she'd ever met. I had said, that's nice. Lissa had looked at me with something in her eyes that I recognized but always refused to name. At dinner, it escalated. Michael had mentioned something, some practical, reasonable thing about their finances, their mortgage refinancing, an adjustment they were considering, and Lissa had turned it into a referendum. Eileen had advice about this. Eileen would approach it differently. Eileen, who had taken nothing and built something from sheer force of will, who had never leaned on anyone, who had, my mother-in-law built everything herself, Mom, not like you. I am fairly certain the table went quiet. I am certain that I heard it the way you hear something you've known was coming for years without letting yourself admit it. I set my fork down. I looked at my daughter, then let her pay your bills. The laugh, the question. What bills, Mom? And I thought, of course she doesn't know, because I never made it a transaction, never made her ask, never wanted it to feel like debt or obligation or leverage. I just paid. I paid because she was mine, and because her children were mine, and because that is what you do when you love people without conditions. At least, that's what I had believed. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I pushed my chair back from the table, said I was tired, kissed Julia and Kyle on their heads, and drove home. I did not sleep that night. My home office has a window that faces east, which means that if you're awake at 4 in the morning opening bank records from the past 2 decades, you get to watch the sky change color while you do it, silver to gray to the particular pale gold of early October. There is something deeply strange about watching a sunrise over a spreadsheet that tells you who you've been for 20 years. I opened everything. Account records, automatic payments, wire transfer confirmations, the insurance policy documents, the car loan statements. I am a financial planner. I know how to find money. I know how to trace it. I had never turned those skills on my own family before. By 7 a.m., I had 3 pages of itemized entries. Lissa's college tuition at the University of Michigan, $64,800 over 4 years. Her MBA at Northwestern, $89,400. The down payment on her and Michael's first house, framed at the time as a gift, because I knew knew they didn't have it, and I didn't want it to cost them anything emotionally. $47,000. Kyle and Julia's tuition at Westview Academy, because Lissa had wanted the best schools, and Michael's salary hadn't stretched that far when they enrolled. $6,400 per month, every month, for 6 years. That was $460,800 and counting. Health insurance for the whole family during the 2 years Michael was between jobs. $31,200. Car loan payments, Lissa's Audi, $1,100 a month for 4 years. Grocery card, topped up automatically every month, $800. Ballet lessons for Julia. English tutoring for Kyle during his difficult 7th grade year. The family vacation to Costa Rica that I'd suggested and financed because I wanted to spend time with my grandchildren and I knew they couldn't swing it. Little things, invisible things, constant things. $1,050,000. $1,050,000. Spread so quietly across 20 years that my daughter could sit at a candlelit table and ask me what bills with genuine bewilderment. I closed the laptop. I sat in my chair and looked at the October sunrise and thought about the word invisible. How I had made myself invisible because I thought love required it. How she had been able to call Eileen self-made without any cognitive dissonance because in Lissa's version of her own life, everything simply existed. The school, the house, the security. It was just there. The way air is just there. Nobody questions where it comes from because it has never, not once, been absent. I picked up my phone and called my bank. I need to cancel a series of automatic payments and standing transfers, I told the woman who answered. Her name was Sandra. I had spoken to her before about other matters. Of course, Mrs. Calloway. How many are we discussing? All of them, I said. Everything connected to my daughter's accounts. Every single one. A pause. Ma'am, are you certain? Some of these are set as recurring. I'm a financial planner, I said. I know what I'm canceling. Cancel them. I need to tell you about the 3 weeks between that phone call and the dinner, because it wasn't just cancellation. I was doing something else during those 3 weeks, something I hadn't planned but couldn't stop once I'd started. I was digging. I have a friend named Carol Breyer, who spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before starting her own consulting firm. I had referred her dozens of clients over the years, the kind who came to me with tangled books and unclear asset pictures, and needed someone with a forensic eye to sort them out. We had lunch every few months. She owed me, professionally speaking, a considerable number of favors. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon. I need a picture, I said, of a company called Natural Beauty Cosmetics and its owner, Eileen Voss. Carol paused. Is this personal or professional? Does it matter? Not really, she said. Give me 10 days. She called back in 8. Her voice had the particular flatness it gets when the news is worse than she expected. Anne, she said, I'm going to email you a folder. Don't read it in public. I sat in my home office, door closed, and opened the folder. It contained 15 documents. I read every one. Natural Beauty had not been founded by Eileen Voss. It had been founded in 1978 by her father, Arnaldo Pfizer, an industrious man from Sao Paulo who had emigrated in his 20s and built a legitimate cosmetics distribution business over 40 years. He had passed away in 2009 and left the company to Eileen, his only child. The company she had been telling people she built from nothing was 16 years old when it fell into her hands. She had inherited it entirely, and then she had spent 12 years destroying it. 3 retail boutiques opened between 2011 and 2016, a Chicago flagship, a location in Miami, a New York pop-up that became permanent. All 3 were now closed. Combined losses, $1.2 million. The Miami location had closed owing $240,000 to a materials supplier named Castellano and Partners, who had filed suit in 2021. The case had been settled out of court, the terms confidential, but the filing was public record, and Carol had found it. Former employees. 6 of them had filed wage complaints with the Department of Labor between 2018 and 2022. Missing paychecks, delayed commissions, vanishing expense reimbursements. 3 of the complaints had resulted in settlements. The beach house in Florida that appeared in Eileen's Instagram photographs, a gorgeous 3-bedroom thing with a pool and a dock, belonged to a college friend named Patricia Helm, who let Eileen use it periodically. The apartment in River North, rented, 2 months behind on payments as of the most recent court-accessible records. The car, a 2022 Mercedes S-Class, financed, $78,000 remaining on the loan. The credit card she flashed at restaurant dinners and family celebrations, maxed at its $25,000 limit. I sat with this folder for a long time. Then I found the piece that made my chest go cold. Among Carol's documents was a screenshot of a text thread, obtained, she explained carefully, through a source who had been directly involved in the matter and was willing to provide documentation as part of a wage dispute. In the thread from 2022, Eileen texted her own son, my son-in-law Michael, requesting a loan of $2,000. Michael had agreed. Eileen had charged him interest, 5%, on a $2,000 loan from her son. I closed the folder. I called Carol back. How solid is this? I asked. The lawsuit is public record. The labor filings are public record. The ownership history I pulled from state incorporation documents and probate filings, also public. The rest came from a verifiable source. She paused. Anne, what are you going to do with this? I'm going to have dinner, I said. I sent the invitations 3 weeks after the bank call. By then, Lissa had already called me twice in a panic. The first time was 17 days in, when Westview Academy sent an overdue notice on Kyle and Julia's tuition. She called at 8 in the morning, her her voice up an octave. Mom, the school says the kid's tuition is late. There's a penalty fee. You'll need to set up your own payment, I said. Mom, how could you do this without any warning? The same way you humiliated me without any warning, I said. You and Michael both have incomes. You'll figure it out. Or you can call Eileen. I hung up. The second call came 4 days later. The grocery card had run out. The Audi payment had bounced. Her voice on the phone was something I hadn't heard in years. Raw, not angry, scared. I let her talk. I didn't yell. I didn't remind her of the numbers. I just said, I love you, Lissa, but you need to understand something about your own life before we can have a real conversation. Come to dinner on Saturday. Bring Michael and the kids. A pause. And Eileen? I thought for a moment. Yes, I said. Bring Eileen. I spent 2 days preparing. I printed the bank records and transfer confirmations. 20 years of transactions organized by category: education, housing, health insurance, vehicles, daily expenses, extras. I had my firm's senior associate, a meticulous 34-year-old named Daniel Ferreira, who had been with me for 9 years, verify the totals independently. He called me afterward. Mrs. Calloway, he said. He had never stopped calling me Mrs. Calloway. The total I'm getting is $1,052,400. That's what I have, I said. Do you want me to prepare a formal summary document? Yes, on firm letterhead, 2 copies. I printed Carol's folder separately, organized it into a presentation packet, and had my attorney, Beverly Nash, a sharp 58-year-old who had handled my business affairs for 15 years, review it for anything legally sensitive. Beverly read the packet and looked at me over her reading glasses. The public record items are clean, she said. The labor filings, the lawsuit, the ownership history. The text screenshot is a gray area. I wouldn't lead with it, but it's not your liability, it's your sources. The rest is verifiable fact. Am I exposing myself to anything? She considered. If everything Carol's given you is accurate, and it looks accurate, then no. Truth is an absolute defense. But Anne, she set the packet down. What exactly is your goal here? I thought about that question for a moment. My goal, I said, is for my daughter to understand her own life. Beverly looked at me for a long time. Then she said, all right, be precise, be calm, and don't editorialize, let the document speak. Saturday arrived. I cooked filet mignon because I wanted there to be no question about effort. Roasted potatoes, a proper salad. I set the good tablecloth, white linen, ironed, and used the crystal wine glasses that had been my mother's. I wore my white silk blouse, which is the most expensive piece of clothing I own, and which I had not worn in 2 years. The thick envelope sat on the shelf in the hallway. Daniel's summary document and Carol's packet, combined, organized with dividers. They arrived at 7. Michael first, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of a man who doesn't know what he's walking into. Lissa with careful eyes, watching me for signals. Kyle and Julia, dressed up because I'd asked them to be, both quiet in the way teenagers get when the adults in the room are tense. Eileen arrived 8 minutes later. She had dressed for it. Royal blue wrap dress, heels that added 3 inches, perfume that arrived ahead of her. She swept in with the particular confidence of someone who has never not been the most interesting person in the room. Anne, she glanced around my kitchen, my living room, my perfectly ordinary house that I had painted myself and paid for outright. So cozy, so simple, a smile, how charming. Glad you came, I said. I meant it. We sat down. I poured the wine. We ate. I listened to Eileen talk about a potential new investor, a meeting she'd had in New York, a line she was considering developing that would, as she described it, revolutionize mid-market cosmetics. She had a talent for narrative. You could watch people lean in while she talked, pulled by the specific gravity of a person who has perfected their own story. I watched my daughter's face while Eileen spoke, that particular softening, that devotion. I set down my fork. I said, Michael, would you grab that envelope from the shelf in the hall? He looked at me, looked at Lissa, and got up. The room had changed. It always changes in that moment. When something that has been private is about to become public, there's a shift in air pressure that everyone feels before they understand why. Michael set the envelope on the table. I opened it slowly. There is no reason to rush these things. The first stack went in the center of the table. 20 pages. Daniel's summary on top. Then 20 years of organized statements behind it. This, I said, is everything I've paid for your family. I didn't read from it. I placed it and let it sit. College, graduate school, your down payment, the children's school, health insurance for 2 years when Michael was between jobs, car payments, grocery money, lessons and tutoring and vacations and things that don't have a category. I paused. $1,052,000. Over 20 years. Automatically. Without being asked twice. The sound in the room was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Lissa's face had gone the specific white of someone whose body has redirected blood away from their extremities. Michael was staring at the summary page. His jaw was working slightly. Kyle picked up the first page and read it. Set it down carefully. I turned. The second stack went in front of Eileen. And this, I said, is you. The lawsuit first. Castellano and Partners v. Natural Beauty Inc. Claim $240,000 unpaid materials. Eileen looked down at it with no expression, then looked up at me. The labor filings, 6 of them, marked with their resolution dates. The wage complaints, the delayed commissions, the names of the employees who had filed, the ownership history, Arnaldo Pfizer's name at the top of the incorporation documents from 1978, the probate record from 2009 showing transfer upon his death, the financial snapshot Carol had assembled, the apartment lease 2 months behind, the car loan balance, the credit card statement, You didn't build anything, I said. My voice was level. I want to be precise about that. Not cold, not angry, level. You inherited a company your father spent 40 years creating, and then you ran it into the ground. You lost $1.2 million across 3 locations you opened and closed. You left suppliers unpaid and employees fighting for wages they had already earned. Eileen's chin had come up. Her hands on the table were very still. While you were spending years making my daughter ashamed of me, I continued. While she was sitting at my dinner table telling me you were everything I'm not, you owed $78,000 on a car you barely owned. You were 2 months behind on rent in an apartment you'd told people you purchased, and you were charging your own son interest on a $2,000 personal loan. The table went absolutely, completely still. Kyle made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Eileen stood up. Her face had gone through several things in quick succession: composure, calculation, fury, and landed somewhere that looked like fury wearing composure as a mask. You have no right. I have every right. I didn't raise my voice. These are public court documents and public incorporation records. I didn't fabricate a word of it. You are welcome to dispute anything in that packet with documentation of your own. She looked around the table. At Michael, whose expression I will come back to. At Lissa, who was crying silently, tears running straight down her face without any of the usual gestures people make when they want you to notice them crying. At Kyle, who was reading the wage complaint with the focused attention of a 15-year-old who has just discovered that an adult he trusted has been lying. Eileen picked up her bag. She crossed the room in those heels, each step precise and hard, and the door didn't just close when she left. It slammed. The windows shook. The wine glasses shivered. Silence. Julia, who had been sitting very quietly for the past several minutes, said in a small voice, "Grandma, you paid for everything?" "Yes, sweetheart. For all of it. For school and everything? All of it. For a long time." She processed that, looked at her mother, looked at the papers. Kyle looked up from the labor complaint. "So everything Grandma Eileen ever said about herself," he said, "was a lie." Michael answered him, not me. Michael, who had been staring at the table for the past several minutes with the expression of someone reorganizing a very large and complicated internal structure, said, "Yes, son, it was." He looked at me slowly. Michael, who I had always liked and always hoped was strong enough to survive his mother's mythology. "Mrs. Ann," he said, and his voice was different from how it had been all evening, stripped of something. "There's something else you need to know about my mother." The room went very still. "Something I found 2 days ago." He found it because of a discrepancy in his own accounts. Michael was a mid-level finance director at a logistics firm. Organized, detail-oriented, not the kind of person who misses things for long. 2 weeks earlier, while reviewing a quarterly statement, he noticed a recurring transfer he couldn't immediately identify, $650 a month, going out to an account he didn't recognize, dated back 18 months. He had traced it to a secondary account opened in his name at a bank he didn't use. He hadn't opened the account. He had spent 2 days trying to figure out who had. He pulled out his phone and showed me the account documents. The signature on the opening paperwork was close, almost convincingly close, but not his signature. The address on the account was his mother's current address. "Someone used my information," he said, "to open an account, and then used that account to receive what looks like redirected funds from—" He stopped, looked at the papers on the table. "From some of our household accounts." Lissa made a sound. I looked at the documents for a long time. Then I said, "Michael, you need to call the fraud division of your bank tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. And you need to call a lawyer." "Do you think my mother—" "I don't know what your mother did," I said carefully. "I think you have documented evidence of possible identity fraud and financial misappropriation. That's a conversation for law enforcement, not for us." He nodded slowly. He picked up his phone and walked into the hallway. What happened next unfolded over the following 6 weeks, and I was not the one driving it. Michael retained an attorney, Lawrence Park, 32 years in financial fraud and civil litigation. The following Monday, Beverly Nash, at my request, briefed him on the contents of Carol's folder. Detective Rhea Santu of the Illinois State Police Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation on the basis of the fraudulent account documentation and the Labor Department wage complaints, which had apparently flagged Eileen's accounts in a previous audit that had never quite resolved. I gave a formal statement to Detective Sandu in her office on a Tuesday morning. She was efficient, specific, and had clearly read everything Beverly had sent before I arrived. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, looking up from the folder, "how did you obtain these documents?" "Public records," I said. "A licensed forensic accountant. One personal source who was directly party to a wage dispute." She made a note. "And you had no prior knowledge of the fraudulent account?" "None. Michael brought that to me at dinner." She looked at me for a moment. "This is an unusually complete picture for a family dinner." "I was a financial planner for 30 years, I said. "When I decide to understand something, I'm thorough." The investigation moved faster than I expected. Lawrence Park was very good. The fraudulent account had been opened with Michael's personal information, social security number, address, birth date, information that Eileen had legitimate access to from years of family documents. The $650 monthly transfer had been redirected from a joint savings account that Michael and Lissa shared with a legacy banking setup that hadn't been reviewed in years. 18 months of transfers, $11,700. It was not a large number in the grand context of things, but fraud is fraud at $11,700. It is fraud at $11. Eileen was charged with identity fraud in financial misappropriation 8 weeks after that dinner. Lawrence Park also coordinated with Castellano and Partners' attorney to revive the civil suit, which had been settled confidentially but which now had new evidentiary context. 3 of the former employees, informed of the investigation through their attorneys, agreed to provide additional documentation. I learned most of this secondhand through Beverly, who stayed in touch with Lawrence Park through the process. I was not a party to the criminal case. I was a witness, a source of initial documentation, and then largely a bystander, which is exactly where I wanted to be. Lissa called me on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after the dinner. Not panicked, not defensive. Her voice was something I hadn't heard from her in years. Quiet. "Can I come over?" she asked. She arrived an hour later and sat at my kitchen table, and we had the first honest conversation we'd managed in a long time. She asked me questions I answered as plainly as I could. She cried twice. Not performing it, just crying. The way you cry when something you've been carrying becomes too heavy to pretend isn't there. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't. I should have known. Shouldn't I have known?" I thought about that carefully, because the instinct was to reassure her, but she deserved more than that. "You didn't know because I made it easy not to know," I said. "I thought that was love. I thought love meant removing the friction so completely that you never had to feel it. And I paused. I think Eileen was very good at telling you a story about what strength looks like, and I was very bad at telling mine. So you had her story and you didn't have mine. That's not entirely your fault, but it's not entirely mine either." She was quiet for a long time. "She charged Michael interest," Lissa said finally, "on $2,000 from his mother. Yes, while we were—" She stopped, started again. "While I was sitting at your table telling you she was everything you're not, I didn't say anything. Mom," her voice broke on the word just for a second. "I am so sorry." I reached across the table and took her hand. I did not say it's okay, because it wasn't entirely, and she deserved that honesty too. I said, "I believe you, and I want us to be different going forward, both of us." She squeezed my hand. "What do I owe you?" she asked quietly. "The $1 million. I'm not calculating a debt," I said. "That money was given. I'm not taking it back." I looked at her. "What I want going forward is honesty. I want you to ask me when you need things. I want to know when you're struggling. I don't want to be invisible again." She nodded, wiped her face with the back of her hand. "And the kids' school?" she asked. "Michael is talking to his firm about a salary review. You told me last year you'd been thinking about going back to consulting. I think it's time to think seriously about it again." I paused. "I'll bridge the tuition for 1 more semester while you stabilize. After that, it comes from your household, not mine. That's the new deal." She almost smiled. "A deal. I'm a financial planner," I said. "Everything's a deal." Eileen Voss accepted a plea arrangement 4 months later. 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $11,700 to Michael, community service. The civil suit from Castellano and Partners was settled with a structured payment plan against the remaining assets of Natural Beauty, which by that point was effectively dissolved. She lost very little that the general public could see, but she lost the story. That was the thing that mattered. The mythology, the carefully constructed narrative of the self-made woman who had traveled the world and built something from nothing, and been brave when no one believed in her, it was gone. Michael knew. Lissa knew. Kyle and Julia knew. The wave, once it breaks, cannot go back to being water. Kyle, to my ongoing quiet pride, wrote a persuasive essay that semester for his English class. His teacher gave him an A and wrote in the margin, "Exceptional moral clarity." He showed it to me at Thanksgiving, slightly embarrassed, and I read it at the kitchen table while he pretended not to watch for my reaction. It was about what it means to build something, about the difference between inheriting and creating, about the people in our lives who work without wanting credit, and how it's possible to be surrounded by quiet strength for years and mistake silence for emptiness. He'd written it about me. I didn't cry in front of him because there are some moments that belong in private. I cried in the car on the way home. Then I drove to the office the next morning and started restructuring how I explained things to my clients' children, because I realized that nobody had ever taught Lissa the language for what invisible support looks like, and that if I didn't teach it, nobody else would. 1 year later, almost to the week, Lissa called to tell me she'd landed a consulting contract. 3-day-a-week engagement, project-based, the kind of work she was genuinely good at and had stepped away from after Kyle was born. "It's not Eileen's company," she said, and I could hear her smiling. "It's not $240 million or whatever, but I built it." "I know," I said. "I pitched it myself. I wrote the proposal. I didn't ask anyone." She stopped. "Actually, I did. I called you first, last week. You helped me with the financial modeling section. I helped you review it," I said. "You built it." A pause. "Mom, thank you for all of it. Not just the money." Another pause. "Especially not just the money." I looked out my east-facing office window. October again. The same light as that night with the spreadsheets and the sunrise. "Thank you," I said, "for coming back." I sometimes think about what would have happened if Lissa hadn't said what she said that night, if she'd chosen different words, or softer ones, or none at all. If I had just absorbed it, the way I'd absorbed so many things, quietly, invisibly, the way I'd trained myself to absorb them, I think I would have kept paying. I think the ledger would have kept growing, and Lissa would have kept not knowing, and Eileen would have kept performing, and all of us would have continued in the comfortable fiction of our separate versions of the same story. It was, "What bills, Mom?" That broke it open. 2 words. Asked with total sincerity, by a woman who loved me and had simply never been made to see what love looks like when it doesn't announce itself. I don't think she meant to hurt me. I think she had been given such a compelling story about what strength looks like, sharp and visible and self-declared, that she had simply never learned to recognize the other kind. The kind that shows up quietly, the kind that pays the bill and doesn't wait for the thank you, the kind that builds things that last without needing anyone to know. I spent 63 years being that kind of person. I decided it was time to let someone see it.